The epistle reading for today. First epistle to the Corinthians, chapter 3. We are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to the commission of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation, and another man is building upon it. Let each man take care how he builds upon it. For no other foundation can anyone lay than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, each man's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work which any man has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If any man's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are to God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him. For God's temple is holy, and that temple you are. So, what does Paul mean by Jesus being the foundation? The foundation of what exactly? At first, Paul seems to be referring to church building, that is, the founding and nurturing of a local Christian community. Certainly, in Ephesians, the idea of Christ as a foundation stone is worked up into an image of the church community as God's temple, and in the first epistle of Peter, Jesus is referred to as the cornerstone on which the Christian community is built, but which is rejected by secular folk. Paul is clear in asserting that the only foundation for the church community is Jesus himself, not any alternate human person, not even an apostle, and certainly not, by implication, a mere pope. Anything that is built on the solid foundation which is Christ must be worthy of that foundation. Shoddy work cannot be excused in terms of having an alternate basis which does not demand the utmost care and skill and attention. How is Christ the foundation of the Christian community? First, in the sense that Jesus' moral teachings and exemplary behaviour must determine its ethos. Second, in the sense that devotion to and love of Jesus must be the focus of its coherence. And third, in the sense that it is the atonement attained by Jesus that is the hope, prospect, and goal of the church. Who then is another man who is now building on the foundation laid down by Paul? Is this man a bishop who has taken over as pastor of the Corinthian church, which had Paul as its founder? If so, the apostle is saying that substandard preaching and pastoral care will become known by its fruits on Judgment Day, and that the negligent or misguided pastor will then be ashamed to see his shoddy work be revealed for what it already was. I would add that any fake Christian community compromised with secular or even more so pagan values will not withstand, even in the short term, the challenge posed by the very worldliness which it has tried to accommodate. There is a lesson here for the contemporary Vatican to learn. Another possibility is that Paul has shifted his attention from the health of the Corinthian community as a whole to the spiritual and ethical development of its individual constituents, and that another man means the individual believer who Paul stresses is responsible for their own edification and will certainly be held to account in this matter. Paul's talk of testing by fire and being saved but only through fire is at least highly suggestive of post-mortem purification. In other words, what is conventionally called purgatory in the Western Catholic tradition. Finally, who is the potential destroyer? Is this the Roman state, or a wicked and pertinaciously heretical pastor, or is it the Christian himself? It's unclear why Paul makes this statement. Is it a warning to the Christian that spiritual recklessness risks spiritual annihilation? Or is it an attempt to comfort the afflicted soul that God will exact vengeance upon whoever has ill intent towards them? Now the Gospel reading from Matthew chapter 14. Then he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. After he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the hills by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was many furlongs distant from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately he spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I have no fear." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, bid me come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "O man of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they came to the land at Gennesaret. Now, Mark and John have parallel accounts of this episode, whereas Luke does not refer to it at all. The fact that Peter tries to go to Jesus and almost drowns is not mentioned, however, by either Mark or John. The first thing to realise about the Gospel story is that the situation described is manufactured by Jesus. He tells the disciples to go ahead without him. He then delays for a sufficient time that they have gotten to the middle of the lake. Perhaps he calls up the storm to serve as dramatic background for his walking on water stunt. What isn't clear in the version of the story we've just read is why Jesus did what he did. This only becomes clear in Mark's version, where it is said that Jesus meant to pass by them. According to Mark, then, Jesus' purpose was not simply to catch up with the disciples in order to join them on the boat. It was to pass by them. Now, this phrase, pass by, has deep resonances. In Exodus chapter 33, God passes by Moses. And in 1 Kings chapter 19, God passes by Elijah. In both these cases, the significance is of a showing forth of an image of the divine being, an attempt by God to be intimate with a beloved friend. Now also in Amos chapter 7 verse 8 and chapter 8 verse 2, by way of stark contrast, God declares that he will never again pass by Israel, where Israel here means the northern kingdom which split away from Jerusalem after the death of Solomon. If Jesus' intent was indeed to show that he was himself the God who passed by Moses and Elijah, then the context of the storm becomes relevant. The storm itself was not an unfortunate happenstance. Rather, it was an indication of the presence of God. And the disciples recognized Jesus as the Son of God, which I suspect here means merely the Messiah. Even though Jesus had organized a dramatic theophany, the disciples still hadn't twigged with whom they were dealing. The incident with Peter is what attracts most attention in commentary on this episode, and especially in its associated iconography. I suspect that Mark and John don't refer to Peter's initial bluster and subsequent failure out of respect for that apostle's reputation. Clearly, Matthew is less concerned here with what is politically correct, but he more than compensates for this unflattering story about Peter by being the sole testifier to Jesus' appointment of Peter as the rock on which I will build my church. Now, I could make a platitudinous comment along the lines of, let us not be like Peter, at first pressing our case only to fail ignominiously. But that would not be right. We should note that Jesus actually invites Peter to copy his feat. And at first, Peter succeeds. The lesson to be learned is not that we should not aspire to what is beyond our nature, but rather that we should keep our attention firmly fixed on Christ when we engage in anything that is supernatural. Jesus becomes distracted and began to evaluate his situation in accord with common sense rather than in accord with faith. It was this lapse in communion with Jesus that proved his undoing. But Jesus was there, even in his failure, and was ready to rescue him, even when his faith wavered. There is a double lesson here for the successor of Peter to learn. First, be sure to maintain a spiritual perspective. And second, it is never too late to recognize your abject failure, to acknowledge that you have been building a hovel with hay and stubble, rather than a glorious temple with gold, silver, and gemstones, and to implore Christ's redemptive help to put things right.